All right, it's 12 o'clock, and so with the respect for everybody's time, we'll try to start on time and finish on time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We have a few new members today that weren't able to make it to our first one, but I will say the first one was kind of an orientation, so you're not too far behind us. If you don't mind, Dan, would you mind starting, and we'll just go around the table real quick, just say who you are and where you're from. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dan Armbruster. I have a regular job through Dawson Insurance here in town, but I also serve on the Fargo Civic Commission and the Fargo Dome Authority, so happy to be here and part of this process.
Charlie Johnson, Fargo Moorhead, West Fargo Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Rob Sobolik with the City of Fargo and Fargo.
Dave Zupas, Fargo Dome Authority.
Linda Boyd, Fargo Moorhead Symphony.
Mike Redlinger, city staff.
Dave Peppermore, Fargo's City Commission, and I'm the co-chair, and John is our other co-chair, John Strand, and he is out of town today, so he sends his regrets.
Ed Costin, City of Fargo Finance Director.
Arlette Preston, City of Fargo Arts and Culture Commission.
Nicole Crutchfield, City of Fargo Planning Office.
Jim Gilmore, City of Fargo Staff.
Jeff Schatz, private citizen.
Wow, that sounds good to say, I bet. So
Retired
if you don't mind, I'll just say real quickly, so our main job is we're just going to review and see and make a good recommendation, and then pass it on to the City Commission. So we're doing the fact finding and all the hard work, I guess, and then the politicians get all the glory, which is usually how it goes. And so with that, we'll start with agenda item number 1, Civic Plaza Design Proposal and Update. Mike, will you start us with that?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the task force. We appreciate your time again today for your second meeting. I invited Nicole Crutchfield today just to provide a brief update for this group, just a couple of minutes about a scope of service that the city has recently executed with Scott Bishop, of Bishop Land Design. Scott is from Quincy, Massachusetts. He was just out recently, and he might be a familiar face to some of the folks around this table. Scott was one of the subconsultants to a different Scott, Scott Page, of Interface Studios, who helped with the Downtown in Focus master plan. And so we wanted to just give this committee just a sense of awareness of what's going to be discussed for the Civic Plaza, the design, some of the goals, and some of the aspirations of that study process. So thanks, Nicole, for being here and giving us a quick update.
Great, thanks, Mike, and rest of the committee for having me. In quick summary, as Mike mentioned, Scott Bishop with Bishop Land Design was one of the consultants as part of Downtown in Focus. If you remember, he was the kind of landscape architect that was part of the team. And he and the team really worked on some concepts. You might remember a concept A and a concept B for the Civic Plaza. One included development of the city parking lot there, just on the other side of this building, and the quadrant of First Avenue and 2nd Street. And the other being kind of more developing that corner. One option is developing that corner and doing kind of an elevated parking deck or landscape deck and plaza that kind of projected out over the flood wall and into that the river space. And then an option B was a little bit less expensive, not developing that corner and doing more of a lawn, open space park area. And what the city's done is dive in a little deeper and hired them out for the next phase of analysis to kind of compare those options and look at many others. And he started interviewing many stakeholders, whether it's the park district, river keepers, planning, all of the components that go into construction and design of this block. We're starting to call it like the Civic Quad area. And as we look at the topography change between 4th Street and 2nd Street, as we look at all the different players that would engage in that space, and including you all, and looking at all the potential users of that space that with the development of Block 9, that plaza area, and really just looking at all those stakeholders, bringing all that together into some options to consider and some decision-making tools on how to approach that plaza area. So over the next few months, between now and he'll be out here again in mid-November, so don't be surprised if he'll probably reach out to some of you for some interviews, and he'll be working on the scope of work here probably for the first 3 to 4 months of the year, and looking for some continue engagement during that time period. Is there anything else you'd like me to add, Mike, or?
No, I think that's great. We just wanted to try showcase this work for this committee so that you can understand that at the same time that this is occurring, we're going to have a lot of thought, a lot of conversation about some of the other uses, and I know there's been a variety of ideas that came out of InFocus too, for perhaps a water feature, stormwater, some other kind of concepts, and I think Scott's really the right fit as a landscape architect. He's really got the right vision and the right sort of aspiration for the site. So he's very excited, I think, to be working with Fargo again and working with many of the downtown stakeholders as well as the groups in the arts community.
Yeah, and it does get a little complicated, as maybe mentioned, kind of the structural issues with the soils and the components there, as well as the engagement, again, with the library, the Plains Art Museum, with the Sodbuster, future uses of the space, stormwater management. And the work also includes a little bit beyond this and looking at its relationship to the Mid-America Steel site and the police building and the former public health building as well, and just looking at how all that can connect. And so that's really the primary goal, is making sure we continue that deeper dive of how all those pieces connect.
Any questions by anybody in the committee? And if anybody in the public ever wants to ask a question, please come up to the podium. You're welcome to at any time. And so thank you very much for that. Is there anything else to add? I think it's a very exciting time because a lot of the decisions that are made are going to kind of set the tone for decades in the future. So it's very exciting. And I would say, so now when you look at our new city hall and the library, we kind of have a flavor for what the campus, whatever you want to call this block, looks like. I mean, they kind of have a unique look to them and things like that. So I think that's a good thing. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll move on to item number 2, refresh of the Performance Center feasibility study, consultant services proposal. Mike.
So just a brief update before we get into the committee discussion today. Commissioner Pepcorn, Nicole, and myself met with JLG Architects. JLG helped us out last time, Lee Dobrins in particular, with some of the work downtown and on the HVS study in particular. And so we previewed this just very briefly at our last meeting. And so what we thought it would be good to do, and we talked about this, is just refreshing some of the study conclusions as well as some of the market data that exists in this HVS study, but try keeping that work locally. So we've solicited a proposal from JLG to do that. We don't have that proposal back yet, but by next month, we hope to bring JLG to the table to try continue the conversation the HVS started in 2015, and then also look at some of the changes, again, that have occurred in the market. Number one has been the demolition of Centennial Hall at this facility, as well as the opening of new facilities like the Sanctuary Event Center. So we think that there is some refresh that could be modest here, but we also want to make sure that we understand what's perhaps still out there in this greater regional market for events and programming that could potentially be brought to a new facility. And I'll get into that here in just a little bit. But I think that JLG is capable of doing the work. We're excited to invite them here. And I think that with the City Commission's blessing, we'll look forward to getting started and having another consultant resource. So I think that'll be a really good thing. So happy to answer any questions about that. But
Charlie.
So are they able to refresh the actual feasibility aspect of this? Do they have the?
No, I think that what we're going to ask them to do is just take a look at some of the building and the program requirements, just to look at those again. You know, we were kind of zeroing in on a 2,500 seat type facility. Look at more of the space and more of the site analytics. We also have a couple of maps we'll get into later about what we have available for square footages downtown and for some other sites, including this one. And I think we're just trying to figure out what kind of building program could fit in one of these downtown sites or near downtown. And so that'll be primarily a design and a kind of site feasibility, a little less in market, although we are going to ask them to just give a quick inventory of what we see for events. And like I said, we've done some research on our own as well of some of the events occurring in Winnipeg and Sioux Falls, Omaha, some of those cities that were mentioned by the task force at the last meeting.
Okay.
And I guess that's the question I have for the group. Does that make sense to you to you know, they already did a previous, we could start from scratch and do that too, but to me, they've had good experience and we can kind of use some of the information from the past. So I guess I'd be interested in your comments if you, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I would encourage certainly a refresh of the user groups. Looking through that, I mean, just at first glance, some of that is a little dated now. And wondering if it might not be helpful In the past, I know they interviewed each group separately, privately, but it might be interesting to have one kind of group discussion with the facilitator with some of the performing groups, because I can imagine meeting one-on-one with the dance company, the symphony, the opera, and so forth, and we all say kind of similar yet different things, where in a group discussion, we might be able to kind of zero in on what really works for all these kinds of acoustic groups and what are the challenges.
Can I ask you a question? I go to the Trollwood, when the symphony rocks.
Yep.
That's awesome, and it's one performance. Let's say that you had a place where you could have 5, and you could raise money. Do you think that would be too much for the performers, or do you get what I'm saying? Instead of one performance, having multiple.
Right. I mean, that particular gig was only possible since Lucem was built because of the size of the stage.
Right.
But of course, outdoors,
Right.
we're one and done in the summer. But I think the basic question is, with this kind of facility, how would it affect the programming of organizations like ours? Would we add to our regular Masterwork series? Would we do other kinds of programming there? And I think the answer is yes. We're constrained by facility now. But
So I'm just amazed. So Russ writes all this music for
Yes.
that one performance.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, so that appeals to kids. If you had a couple that were matinees for kids, anyway.
Right, we've had to cut out a lot of our youth and family programming, so this would make a lot of different kinds of performances possible.
I apologize for, but
Oh, that's
I was just sitting there going, man, it's a one-time performance, and it's like, if you had multiple, you would sell them all out, and that's a lot of revenue for the groups. Anyway, that was, okay, and then one more thing, if you don't mind, since I'm the chairman, I can wander a little bit. My vision is to have Hamilton in Fargo and the Moscow Ballet. That's what I want you to picture in your mind, so when they build this place, they don't go, this place is cheesy. When they come here, they're going to go, this is an awesome facility. I can't believe it's here, and we want to come back here. So, Dana, so you have to come up to the microphone so everyone can hear you, Dana.
Interject. My vision is that the FM Ballet is so supported that the Moscow Ballet can go someplace else, and we're all going to see them.
Well, no, and I totally agree that the Fargo, but I'm just saying, to have traveling groups too, it has a good influence. It might inspire kids to see them, because the one thing, if you ever want to see an awesome video, on Google, Take Me to Church with the Moscow Ballet. Oh my God, if you think ballet dancers aren't great athletes, it is the most unbelievable thing. So anyway, all right, that's the end of my sales pitch, but that's, to me, that's the stuff that we should be aspiring to, or one of the things, along with a lot of other things, but to have national things, also to help local things. So, once again, I apologize for wandering too far off the agenda, but I don't know if anybody has any comments to add, but I have a couple of more quick things just while I'm going around the table. One is for Rob. So if it's a 2,500 seat facility, so parking-wise, you don't need 2,500 spaces. Like, do you know, and maybe you can get back to us, but do we have enough parking, and what should the options be for that?
I think you have plenty of parking within the 4 to 8, 9 block area. You build these types of facilities downtown to generate the activity at the bars and restaurants 1 to 10 blocks away. So, yes, it's a different climate here, and people have a different expectation. But I think with it being in a downtown locale with lots of activities around it, that helps it. So no, you typically, a parking space for every 3 or so, but there's not a stadium built today that has that.
So, and I guess to me, that would be like part of the audit that we do, that we should have, here's the approximate number of parking spots that we think we would need, and also maybe look at what our ramps are that are in the Skyway that would be connected. How many would be connected to this building? So anyway,
It also helps to add to that whole 24/7 viability of parking ramps, because most of your events are going to be happening when those ramps clear out and they're working.
But that's the other thing, to make sure that we start planning ahead for that, to say what happens if there's an event, how, and especially with the Block 9, what's the agreement? Do we have something like that? And then the other thing, so I'm not that bright, but the one smart thing I had today was, how about the staff that works at this new facility parking in our city staff when they're not here, using the city hall parking for the staff of the building. So anyway, that was my one.
Mr. Chair, we've actually got a parking map as well as the square footage map, so we can get into parking here in a little bit. So we just have a few other laydown materials before kind of turning it over for a large committee discussion on the third item.
I apologize for going out of order,
No,
Mike,
you're
but that's
good.
nothing new. So, okay. So is there other thing, do you want to go through that then?
Yeah, so actually, let's take first this brief inventory of other facilities in the region. At the last task force meeting, we had talked in particular about the deck in Duluth, the Premier Center in Sioux Falls, Winnipeg, and Omaha. And so what I did was just very briefly look at the event schedules for these facilities. This isn't exhaustive. It doesn't include absolutely every last private event or rental that's occurring in these facilities. But just to give a flavor and a snapshot, and you're welcome to visit any of these websites, but in Duluth, for example, you have college athletics that are occurring in the same facility as the Minnesota Ballet, as well as film festivals, and some educational and science exhibits as well, focused on water. Some of the same touring kind of family theater events that you see at a facility like ours, the Peppa Pig Show, coming here to the Civic later in November, also arriving in Duluth. Sioux Falls, the Sanford Center, this is the center that, if you're familiar with Sioux Falls, that was built as a part of the remodel of the Sioux Falls Civic Arena, Coliseum area, the convention center that got built in the, I kind of call it Midtown Sioux Falls. A lot of the same sort of semi-pro events that you might see, as well as live music. What I thought was interesting, I was just sampling November and December events, but I was looking out into February, and they actually pick up some pretty significant shows. Fleetwood Mac and James Taylor, coming to that facility. That's a larger venue, I believe about 5,000, maybe 5,500 seats, and so they're able to configure that in a variety of ways. Winnipeg has a lot of the fine arts activities that you would expect with a large regional center in Winnipeg, a lot of large musical theater, the Touring Chicago performances coming there, the Manitoba Opera, the Winnipeg Symphony. They have an Alec Baldwin comedy show coming up here in November, as well as in April, next spring, a regional performance of Kinky Boots, which is, I think, going to be out in this, Chicago and some of the other larger communities. So they're going to get that for a run in Winnipeg. And then just this morning, I took a look at Omaha. Omaha has a performing arts center, but then also has what many of us would refer to as the Quest Center. I believe they've renamed that the CenturyLink Arena. That's where their larger, Xcel Energy type venue is for some of the bigger concerts. But some of their smaller events at their Performing Arts Center, as well as an adjacent theater, jazz music, comedy shows, some musical theater that's touring, and then some other live holiday music. So I just wanted to provide the snapshot, and again, not to claim that this is exhaustive by any means or comprehensive. There's a whole bunch of other private events and private corporate things that are happening that I didn't capture here, but I just want to give the committee a sense of what we found in doing that research.
Hey, Michael?
Yes.
So you didn't, in Sioux Falls, you didn't look at what's going on in that Washington Pavilion?
I didn't do the
Which is the
pavilion.
Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, right. I didn't do the pavilion. I just did the Sanford Center first, but yeah, I can look at that if the committee is interested. So, you bet. Yeah, that's the downtown repurposed high school in the old Brownstone High School downtown in Sioux Falls, a beautiful building. And so I will add that to the next list. And then Jim Gilmore and I also took a look at an aerial view of the square footages that are available on some of the public facilities downtown. I'll have Jim actually walk through these maps, and then he also has an inventory of parking availability in the downtown with structured parking as well as surface. So if you just want to take one of these large 11 by 17s and pass down, that'd be great. I'll turn it over to Jim.
The last meeting, there was some discussion of, is there another area in the downtown where you could have this type of facility? And so certainly I think if you just look at the footprint of the footprint of the facility, the problem is having those adjacent parking spaces. As Rob noted, if we want to have one or one car space for every, 4 people, you're going to need 600 parking spaces. The footprint needed to build 600 surface parking spaces is around 235,000 square feet. And so what you quickly run into is that I guess really can't find a site downtown that isn't going to, that has enough parking nearby, or you can provide it on site. For instance, Mid-America Steel, which the city owns, once you can't get into the floodway, and so you have to stop at that point. You can't really get really onto the railroad tracks or south of the tracks. We've got about 5 acres there. If you completely covered that with parking, you wouldn't get quite 600 cars in, so you'd have to put your facility up. So that becomes, I don't think any of these sites really work that well. You look at the Ground Transportation Center, another relatively large city-owned property, but that would require, reconstruction of that facility, would be quite expensive. Over behind Old Broadway, you could maybe fit it in there, but you'd probably have to build a parking garage nearby. The cost of parking, structured parking is about $25,000 per parking stall. So if you have 600, you're well over probably 15 to 18 million to build a parking garage, and then certainly there's a lot of room in Island Park. But I don't know that we'd really want to use that space, and there's not much parking available. And so when you look at this parking, parking facility map and what's close to the, City Hall, you see that there is a lot of, parking in the vicinity, and that's one of the, I think, really huge advantages of being in this quad. We have, 250 spaces in Radisson. The most they ever use in the evening is probably 100 for overnight guests. There's going to be 379 in the Block 9 garage. As part of our agreement with them, they'll have 200 parking spots available in nights and weekends, and likely more than that. Roberts Commons, we have 455 parking spots. The overnight parking is maybe 150 with the residents there. The underground at the Ground Transportation Center, a couple blocks away, is 185, virtually no use overnight. And then you just see the other surface lots and street parking. And so if a facility is either on the civic site or even if it was south of City Hall, you really don't need to provide any parking. You probably have just a really ample supply of parking. If you try to go west of downtown, you're going to need to find probably a block and a half just for your surface parking, another half block for your facility. So trying to clear out a 2-block area in the downtown or really anywhere in town becomes really difficult. I can't really find another site that's going to work very well other than kind of on this campus. So.
And maybe you want to mention, Jim, so what we're looking at too is the civic lot. We're looking at the potential of adding some parking. We're hoping that we're going to be able to add a couple levels. That might happen or might not. And the other thing, to me, the key thing is that 2 of those ramps are within the Skyway. If it's built here, that it would be connected without having to go outside. So to me, those are.
Yeah, and that doesn't count the, there's going to be 140, those 140 spots east of the library, that's surface parking, but there's 80 under City Hall. There's another 110 that the city has access to under City Center, and another 100 on the surface parking just north of the Civic that we have under long-term lease. So, there's a lot of different parking options, downtown, and if we had 600 more cars at night, or 800, or even 2,500, they're probably going to be able to park within 3 blocks of the facility.
Very good. Thanks, Jim.
And actually, Charlie, I just looked up the Sioux Falls Pavilion, just for the committee's benefit. Looked it up real quick. November, December, Jazz Blues Society, Charlie Brown, the Christmas show, as many of these other regional venues are getting that. Augustana College, their theater department, doing their holiday show. The South Dakota Symphony is I believe, headquartered there, correct? I believe that is their home venue. Mannheim Steamroller, Elf the Musical, Children's Theater, and a family theater, and then a variety of holiday shows, including the Nutcracker Ballet.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Mike. So are we ready to move on to we're going to number 3, building program development, the next steps. And 3A is prospective facility users.
When you bring up the Nutcracker in South Dakota, that's just one example of the kind of programming that local groups could combine to do. Currently, Red River Dance does a smaller version of it, but it's a mainstay in many cities where the local ballet and symphony do big productions of the Nutcracker. And with a facility that size, not meaning audience size, but stage and performance space and technical capacity, those are the kinds of new programming that we could do, which I really don't think was discussed in the previous study.
And the other thing is, what you think of here is the Concordia Christmas concert too. And I don't know if we've talked to Concordia directly to see if they would be interested. I'm guessing they would, just because of the acoustics at their auditorium but you never know. They might be happy with where they are, but I think we should at least ask them to say, if you had this facility available, would you be interested? Charlie?
Well, I was going to say, I think this is a great place to bring up Linda's idea again. I think a meeting between us and as many of those many of those user groups as we could find would be probably, the sooner the better, would probably be a good thing, and find out, who would be interested in this, what kind of things they would expect to see from it. I mean, that could be a pretty quick next step, it would seem to me.
And I think that what they did with the JLG, they interviewed them individually. But like you said, when everybody's in the same room, you might get a much more different and more interesting answers. So I think that's a great thing, and maybe we can be I think that's good, Mike. I think we would, to have us be kind of the group that we have them meet with, I think that'd be awesome. Does anybody else agree with that or think that's a good idea?
Well, JLG can still do individuals too, but I think it would be great if we did a group meeting and then they could go from there. Group first, maybe, right, Linda?
Sure.
Yeah. And have JLG sit in on it, of course.
Okay, so that's 3A. Were there any other things anybody wanted to talk about that? Any additional things? Go ahead.
The potential users, in terms of revisiting everyone, like you mentioned, the universities, I think everyone that was interviewed before certainly should be interviewed again, but I think having probably the Arts Partnership involved, there certainly might be new groups that have arisen that would be potential users since that last study. So just to make sure that we kind of make sure that we're casting the net wide enough.
And the other thing is, we still should look at other options as far as location, but I think from the perspective of, if you start looking at all the things, this is by far the best fit, but I still think we should look at other options. The other thing is, when they did this, there was a lot of things that were not finished like they are now. So to give you an example, like Rob, the loading in and out of trucks, well, now it's a lot more defined. What the street looks like with the city hall entrance, there's a lot more specific. If they chose this site, they'd be able to be a lot more specific as to how it would all work. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but if you look at it now, it's not what it was. I don't know. That was one of the concerns. If you had it on a main street, if you have big trucks going in and out, especially with some of those large concerts, it's several trucks. So maybe if you don't mind talking a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's just important that goes into the site selection as far as if you're going to do it, where you're going to put it, and realizing that most of these shows come with 1 to 4 semis and touring buses. So even if you were to take this square block area that the library, city hall, and civic center currently set on, you also want to think about where on this site you put it, because 1 or 2 sides are going to be more of an industrial use and a different use versus the grandiose lobby space. So that, where the civic center currently sits, you end up on a street, but you also then can put your loading dock area to the area that is probably the most out of public view from a site standpoint.
So in a way, things are a lot more defined than they were when we first did this study, so that's a good thing. The other thing, and this is one more editorial comment, the finishes of the Civic, kind of would match, hopefully, the library and the city hall. I mean, now, you kind of know you're not going to have the Sydney Opera House. It wouldn't really quite fit, even though that would be nice. You have to kind of match what the rest of the campus looks like on this block. I would be curious, anybody else's comment on that, but I guess at one point we had talked about looking for something iconic, but that would be a little bit difficult when you have kind of a couple other buildings that are the same. Anybody have any comments on that? Jeff?
Well, I don't know if I have comment on that specifically, but I'm not familiar with that study, so there's just a couple questions I have, and that is, what kind of focus grouping did they do with that? To what extent? And I heard two visions that came out here just in this discussion that are differing a little bit. Has there been focus grouping with external stakeholders, people within the community with regard to what the vision is for this facility? I don't know if there's been anything that's been done with that beyond just the smaller groups of people who have looked at this. Because if this is to be a community facility and something that is going to serve a broader group of people, shouldn't we have input from some of those folks as to what they would envision happening with a facility like this? And that's the first thing. The second thing is sustainability. That's something I talk about all the time, and that is, of the groups that they've visited with and of the things that they've investigated, what is the sustainability of these organizations to, over a period of time, either grow and or maintain their presence in a facility like this, so that you don't have that gap all of a sudden of 3 or 4 organizations, close shop and everything else, and you were depending on them to be big players and be part of sustaining a facility like this. So those two things hit my mind.
That's excellent.
In the study, just to answer Jeff's question, the study did indicate who was talked to at the last time. Linda was one, a variety of both performing arts, visual arts. Dana is on that list, community stakeholders, and then other venue operators as well. So there was a pretty thorough investigation that was conducted in 2014 and in 2015. Rob, I believe you were a part of that as well. And this is, I think it serves as a good template, because I think many of these groups are still in existence, but there are some that, even a quick glance at this, no longer exist, to your question and point about sustainability.
And then, just to follow up, if I may, if you're going to kind of refresh this whole report and maybe do some additional focus grouping and that kind of thing, is it, and I'm not quite sure what the role is of this task force, or Dave, you as the leader, but is it to develop, and would we want to develop some kind of vision statement that would, we could use and say, this is what we envision for a facility like this? Or has there been anything like that done? Where there's actually something that you can use as a common language? Because my experience with things like this is that if there isn't a common language that's being spoken, there gets to be all sorts of confusing language. And then you get all sorts of different innuendo and all sorts, you know how it goes. And then all of a sudden it's something that it's not in the general public. And that's my thinking on it.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That's excellent. And obviously you speak from experience with some of your things that you've gone through, so that's very valuable, and I do think that's very important. And I think as a group to have a vision statement, and also I kind of gave her a summary at the beginning, but it's like we need to think about what are we doing, what are we trying to accomplish, so that was excellent.
Well, and I would second that. I think Jeff kind of downplayed his self-introduction as private citizen. He's actually a private planning consultant now that the Symphony and many school districts and many other groups in town are using his services right now. And I'll just say that what you bring to bringing focus groups together and coming up with vision statements, and that absolutely is something that we should go through, not just as a group, but as a community. That would be outstanding. And I know, at what point do you embark on that? And like you say, what role does this body serve? Thinking back to the library and the public input we got as we were shaping the purpose and the location and various design aspects of that was very helpful.
Very good. Any other comments? And from the audience too, if anybody has a comment, we'd love to have you add to the group. So otherwise, we'll move.
Well,
Go
I have a
ahead.
question on facility location. I think we kind of skated past that with kind of a little bit of language about maybe we should still look around. I'd like to just clarify that a little bit.
Yeah.
Are we still looking around? I thought we, both the community input we had on all the latest public exercises, processes, and certainly our own, looking at the studies that have been done, looking at the parking, are we able to at least move past this spot that we're saying, this is the location we're looking at, now let's dig into the various aspects? Or are we still kind of looking around, and then if we are, we should have a focused way to do that?
It's good.
I think we should focus on this spot. I think we should be done looking around. I mean, I don't see, I appreciate looking at those other options, but from a parking standpoint and from the appeal, to me anyway, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, of having it in this quad with the city hall and whatever green space and plaza effect there's going to be after it all gets designed up, and the library, and then the connection to the parking, and the proximity to bars, restaurants, et cetera. I don't really see anything resembling a better choice than this.
Yeah, Dave, I think that was sort of my point of this thing. None of these sites are good enough for the facility, and you look further west, I don't think there's another site, with sufficient size and would benefit the core of the downtown. It's just not there. I guess if you want to have a consultant look around, you can, but I've been familiar with the downtown, and I don't think you're going to find it out of the right where we're sitting.
We ran into this when we were looking for potential downtown sites for convention space. There really weren't any. The only one they could really focus on was tearing down the ground transportation center, which you mentioned as an option for this, and that carries its own problems, relocation, pay back the feds, whatever you have to do to do that. And whereas this land exists, it's in an ideal spot, I think, and it's ready, and I think it kind of fits the vision for the downtown that the InFocus group came up with. I mean, it's not like we haven't studied this stuff somewhat. I mean, and Dana clears her throat when I start talking about studies, because she knows what's coming. You can study yourself until your eyes bleed, and then you can study that some more. And I think, updating this study a little bit's great. That's a great idea. It is a little bit dated, but I don't, and the idea of including the community, absolutely. But I think we got the site.
One other thing, so that study was done a couple of years ago, and so much has changed. So Block 9, that's a huge impact. And the other, so when you start looking at the sanctuary and the Fargo Theater, it's kind of like you have a little bit of a, and then downtown, just Broadway itself, we're still within walking distance. So a lot of those things have changed in the last couple of years, that it's much different than it was. So I think that's true. I just hesitate, because even though that it makes sense, but anyway, that's a big decision, just that alone, saying, should we just not bother with the rest of the sites and focus on this? That's
what I think.
Well, should we have a vote, or how do you want to do it? I guess that's my.
You're the chair, just make the call.
Yeah.
From 25 years of events experience, managing events, there are logistical challenges, some, with this site, but they're far fewer than anywhere else in downtown, particularly just from a cost, infrastructure, all of that. So it's, this type of facility should be downtown. This is the spot.
I would make a formal motion that we direct the refresh of this study to focus on this site.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Or I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I would love, just so you know, you're welcome to make a comment, and I would love to if you wish to.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking I need to go back and actually read the original study, but there was so much discussion, and it can become very circular very quickly. And if you want to take the next step and start developing a building and developing a site, I would say now is the time, decide where it is, and go forward.
Dave, you're the only other person that hasn't spoken yet, and I like making sure everybody gets a chance.
Well,
What do you think?
from my vantage point, I wasn't in the original study of looking at the different spots, so I was thinking in my head, I actually might abstain because it didn't go through the exercise of understanding it, so I'm a little uneducated on the site study. So in that respect, I'm kind of in the dark because I wasn't on the front end of going through the study side.
Any other comments? Jeff?
Are we setting ourselves up here for a vote? Is that where we're headed here? Because, you know, if I vote on something, I want to know what I'm voting on with regard to where that goes from here. I mean, this task force, I wasn't here at the first meeting, so I apologize, but what is the power of this task force? We vote on something, what does that mean?
My motion was just intended to give this site as a focus to this group to come back. So I think that'll be, in my mind, kind of the final step of identifying the feasibility of this particular site. Because if they are directed to focus their energies on this site and they come up with some concerns or shortcomings, I think that would come through. So we're not today saying, here it is, but giving the study some better direction.
Right. That's what, as the seconder, I would agree, and everything we do is going to end up being a recommendation of the city commission anyway, obviously.
Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll move on
That's good.
to number 3C, cost estimate. So Mike, I don't know if you,
We just actually had this as a placeholder from our last meeting, just to talk about the development of cost. That will not be in this first scope of work with JLG. We're simply going to be talking about locational analysis, what the kind of building program would look like to fit into this space. But that is something that, at a very preliminary level, we want to try put into a second phase of work. I should also mention that we believe that this first book of work under the procurement law and procurement policy of the city, we'll be able to just do this work. But we're likely looking at the city commission authorizing a full bid package if we were to go beyond that and start developing a more robust building program and get to some specifics. So that is something that, like with other city projects, that we'll have to prepare for. And I think that's when we would do that, is to try to get into some deeper dive on cost. There was some real preliminary cost estimate detail in the HVS report, but it admittedly was not a feasibility study about cost, is a feasibility study about users. And so I just wanted to mention that.
that's good. Anybody have any comments about that? I guess the only thing I would say is for the cost, we have to make sure we have everything included, including the demolition, the skyways, do you know what I mean? It's very important that we don't have surprise costs. And so we'll have to be very thorough and not be in a big rush, but I think just the whole concept of the skyways, it's very important now that we're connected to the new city hall. Well, we have to get a definition, who should pay for that? Is that part of this project? Is that part of the city? Do you know what I mean? There's things like that I think we need to make sure that we're very thorough. So we had a little bit of some uncovered issues with the city hall. If we know the number up front and we're very thorough, we have to be that way. I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but I just think that's part of the deal. Yes, Jeff?
So just refresh my memory on this. The cost estimate is one thing, but the resource acquisition is the other one. So where does the resources come for this? I know that may be ignorant, but is
You mean how you're going to pay for
is
it?
this a public-private property project, or is it a public project, or where do we stand on that whole issue?
Well, that's part of our little responsibility too, Jeff. I think that there's a multitude of things, and if you don't mind, I'm the one that'll kind of throw it all out there, and you can knock a lot down, but naming rights, that's one thing. I do think city participation, that's another thing. I do think potential fundraising, and I know Linda is hesitant about capital campaigns, but the one thing I will try to sell you on is usually a capital campaign is separate from a supporter of that program. Do you get what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of people that will support this building and support the programs that are in it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I can definitely, so that's thing, but what I see this as, the city, we're going to be the conduit, but there's going to be multiple areas. The other one is, I think there's large arts support groups nationally that I think we need to cultivate. So there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of people at this table that have a lot of other ideas, but I look at it as the city as being the conduit, but there's going to be lots of other ways. Does that make sense to you, Jeff? And maybe that doesn't answer your question, but that's.
No, it makes perfect sense, and my next one would go to Rob, and that is, performing arts centers like this across the United States that you've researched or that you know about, they're running at a deficit all the time, or are they, I mean, the operational cost of something like this, that's always a concern by private donors when it's a public-private thing, because if I'm a private donor and I give to a project and all of a sudden there are costs associated from an operational standpoint because things didn't show up to use the facility, that then becomes a bit of an issue if you have to go to the taxpayer and say, we're going to raise some taxes to be able to offset the operational costs. That's just my concern. I don't know where that stands, but Rob, what would your experience tell us?
Well, first, I never say never, because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten married. But, historically, yes, performing arts centers across the country, the lion's share do run at a deficit. There are a couple of very unique things in Fargo with that, as far as that are pointed out in this study as well, with the demographics of this area, but also the lack of a venue of this size, and the opportunities, plus having a dedicated staff already kind of somewhat, obviously there's going to be some add, but being a city-owned facility, city-managed facility, you've got that advantage to manage staffing costs as best as you can. You're going to lack the parking revenue, which most performing arts centers don't get a parking revenue anyway. But that's where I tend to not diverge from others, but just to say it's careful on how you design this. You want to make it very user-friendly for symphony and opera and things such as that, but it also needs to be able to bring in this 1,000 to 2,500, if you will, whether it's theater show, traveling Broadway theater shows, concerts, different things such as that. And given that, and given the popularity of that level, given the proximity to Minneapolis, to Sioux Falls, to Omaha, it would be a very popular venue, not only for local promoters, but national promoters as well. Gate City Bank Theater at the Fargo Dome, that goes away. It accommodates it right now to bring in that level and caliber, but this facility would further enhance it, bring in larger performances, more performances, maybe not a Hamilton, sorry Dave, but longer runs, and so I do see it being pretty successful if operated correctly and if the correct decisions are made as it goes in.
Can I add one more thing? You talked about no parking revenue, but the other thing is that I think we should talk about is food service and liquor service.
Absolutely.
The revenue from that would be substantial. And then, to me, part of it is, do we want to have that be open all the time? Do we have this be a coffee, breakfast, or who knows what? To me, that's part of it. Is it a multi-use thing? So I guess to me, if we have Block 9 where 300 people are working and we have City Hall, we have a pretty good clientele of people even on a daily basis. So anyway, just things like that.
And I think we need to keep in mind the type of facility and the ownership this is when we're doing, and this we'll have to have a separate feasibility study for funding. That's going to be, I think, a separate process. But when you have the full spectrum of, on one end, completely publicly owned, like the Fargo Dome, and on the other end, a completely privately owned and constructed performing arts facility that some other places have, that's the spectrum of appeal to a private donor. So if it's completely private and you'll always have naming rights and so forth, but if it's its own nonprofit entity and whatever, I think that's kind of like the Plains Art Museum, if you will. And there are certainly challenges for capital campaigns for those kinds of organizations and buildings. But when you have a major facility that's going to be publicly owned and run, which I totally agree with, I think realistically, and I think a funding feasibility study would reflect this, and which is what we experienced with the library, is it decreases your ability to do major private fundraising. I think that's what we experienced at Blue Stem. You know, there's already massive public resources invested in it, which is great. It's for the whole community. And so there's less incentive, if you will, for the same kind of private support that you get for other types of things. I just think we need to be realistic and understand that and do a complete financial feasibility study, speaking with potential donors and so forth, with that understanding, so that we don't over-project in any way. And I also don't think we should close the door to different kinds of revenue streams that are public, like makes the Fargo Dome possible.
Yeah, I would agree that I think resources for this are going to be, it is going to be public-private, but it's going to be mostly public from that aspect.
Is there a way for, in the feasibility study, for whoever were to do that, to take into account the existing capital campaigns going on right now in the greater metro area? Because there are many, and they are big. And so what's the saturation point? I'm not smart enough in that field to know, but if there's somebody who could figure that out, that would be interesting to hear, because right now, some of the things I've been working on with some other groups, there is a boatload of capital campaigns that are going on that are in the millions of dollars. And so what does that mean? And what's the right timing? I think we need some really smart people to give some guidance on that.
Well, that would be the focus of a separate fundraising feasibility study,
Yeah.
but that's what the focus is, and they would certainly look around the community and see what else is out there, absolutely.
Are there companies that you can hire to do that kind of a
Oh, yeah.
study? Yeah? And how much would that cost? What, 50 grand, 100 grand?
No, not quite.
Not that
I
much?
bet you'd get somebody to do a good financial feasibility study for 30, 40, I would guess.
Probably be worth the investment.
You know, it's the standard consultant fee of, 20 to 50.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere in there. Just want to figure out how much.
Unless you veer from the scope of services, which we could do as additional services on it.
You've got it down pretty well already, that's good.
So we're adding to the list of things to do. That's good. That's why we're here. Any other comments about that? Otherwise, we'll move on to number 4, review updated future topics.
So this is just an update of the handout from last month, just to forecast agenda items. And so what we will do next month is spend actually quite a bit of time on that first bullet point, consultant services, likely have JLG here, and work with Dana and others on getting some of these interviews on the schedule so that we are making that happen. And then some of this is real negotiable and can be moved, certainly defer to your group about how you want to do this, but I had plugged Rob in there just to give us kind of a,
Speaking of negotiable,
to give us a deep dive on the dome operations and some of the opportunities there. Obviously, Rob's found a lot of success there, a lot of hard work, but we've got a great facility. It's well-run in the dome, and a lot of lessons learned there, I think, for this future facility. And then, things like finance and capital campaigns, we can certainly talk about at a later time before the year is out. We can also move that tax-exempt overview to another time to spend as much time as we can more on the program side and the user side up top. So I've got some other good notes from your discussion today, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for helping us out with some future direction.
Yes, Charlie.
How hard would it be to get some cost, like even basic proposals for a fundraising feasibility study like we were talking about, Linda? I mean, just to get some ballpark figures. I mean, the sooner we know, the better, right?
I can make some calls and send some firms you could help.
Send it to Michael, yeah, that'd be great.
And if there's others, too, that the committee has worked with, I actually just know of a couple that have done university advancement, more of that higher ed fundraising, but if others come to mind locally or in the Minneapolis market, we're happy to make any phone calls and help get this committee agenda prepared for the next meeting.
So Mike's the contact person, so if anybody has questions or or suggestions, Mike's the guy to contact, and he'll send out all your, and maybe Kemper can send out the information. But if anybody has anything they want to make sure, a specific recommendation, please let us know, if that makes sense. Rob?
I would just ask every committee member, task force member, read the HVS report. There's a lot of information. A lot hasn't changed since this report was out. We knew Block 9 was coming online. It's just happening to come out of the ground now. We knew where City Hall was going to be. It's just open now. Sanctuary Events was operating. We knew what Bluestem could do. So there's a lot of information in here. The Fargo Dome operating model, that's what's in this report, other than the parking side of things. So that there's a lot of information in this report that will, I think, answer a lot of questions. You'll see everybody who was spoken with, the groups, all the universities, not as much the high schools, but the universities, the theater departments, the FM Symphony, the opera, were all spoken with. And so I heard JLG come up, I'm like, why are we doing that? Well, that makes sense with it's more on the construction side of things. But this will give you a lot of information and kind of bring it full circle to say, oh, we can make this a little bit easier other than the financing. And figuring that out, I think there's a lot of answers that lay within this report.
Yeah, that's true, and then we can all feel better about that and then move on to the financing and things like that. What can we afford? The whole thing is always comes down to what you can afford, right? You may have to come up with some parameters about what the city thinks it can afford, what the city contribution can be, and then a study to find out realistically what the appetite is for fundraising for a facility of this kind, and then you find out pretty quickly whether you can afford to build it or not, or what you can afford to build.
But I think a lot has changed, though, as far as the footprint, though. I mean, it's a lot more refined, and I do think now we can be a lot more accurate as far as what it would cost. And I do think that's going to be the key question. It's like, what's it going to cost? And it might be, we don't know, but I do think we can be a lot more accurate as to what that number is going to be.
As far as the cost side, absolutely.
And that's a big deal, because that has a domino effect with a lot of the other conversation we're going to have. So I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but I think it's a good thing.
How do we get access to that? Is it online somewhere, or is it?
Kemper sent it out, but we can send it out again. So we have an
in the
electronic
first
link.
meeting
Yep.
run through?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. It's all there, but we'll make sure you get it, Jeff.
Well, that's, if I could, that's the other thing too, is setting dates for these meetings. I can about imagine the challenge with trying to do that with everybody's schedules. And is there any way that we can, and how long do we plan to be meeting? I mean, I'm thinking this is going to go on into the spring, and is there any way that we can find a consistent somehow day of each month where we could all commit to it, because then we can pre-plan, because schedules change, and to do doodle polls over and over and over again, and then find out that you're like the only one that can't be there, and then the meeting's held, and then you can't be there. That's a little frustrating.
So you're
That
saying
happened
set a
last-
schedule and let us figure out how to get there, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we knew ahead of time that it was going to be on the Wednesday of every month or whatever, then when I'm scheduling things, I know that, and I'm not going to schedule anything at that time. But right now, what's happening is we get the doodle poll, and then I can about imagine what it's like to try to manage that and trying to figure out where it might fit. And then, so I'm just bringing that up as a conversation piece, because I don't want to miss a meeting. I mean, if I'm going to be on a task force, I want to be here. So.
Can I give you my opinion on this? This is a unique opportunity, and so I know we want to be in a rush, but we have to do this methodically, because this is a one-time, best time, and so I don't think we need to rush it. That's just my opinion.
So
So,
just set a monthly time so that we can schedule.
and I'm sure Kimber would much more appreciate it, because she's been trying to do it where we could all make it, and that's almost an impossible task. So why don't you give us a chance to work on that, and we'll try to do that. But I just want to go back to the thing. Let's not rush this. And this is a critical thing. And if we're methodical, I do think Jeff's point about having some public forums is an excellent point, to just make sure it's not just us, but to make sure people are on board and know what we're doing. So
And if we'd like to meet monthly, though, I think a schedule would be great, because, and you're never going to have a month when everyone's there. So you could just set a schedule and.
So we'll work on that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that, and so we'll try to have a consistent date that works best for everybody. Any other things we want to cover? Otherwise, I'm a big fan in wrapping it up instead of just, but I also want to make sure if there's anybody that has a comment but otherwise, if there's specific things that you want to cover at a certain time, please talk to Mike. And thank everybody for participating. To me, this is I hope you consider it a huge honor. I do, because I think this will be, and I know the library was awesome, this will be a big deal for long after we're gone. And so I hope you feel that way. It's a big responsibility, and I appreciate all your time, but I think this is going to be a fun thing, and everybody here has excellent things to add to the discussion. So thank everybody for coming, and it's a little after 1, so have a good afternoon.